Hello friends, welcome you all. Today we are going to see coagulants and anticoagulants. Contents are divided into two parts. Part 1, Introduction to Coagulant, Coagulation Cascade, Mechanism of Blood Clotting, Coagulation Factor and their common names. In Part 2, we are going to see classification of coagulants, mechanism of anticoagulants as well as anticoagulant drugs. To start with the coagulation of blood is a complex process during which blood forms the blood clots or solid blood clot, which is an important part of homeostasis, whereby a damaged blood vessel or damaged blood wall is converted by fibrin clot to stop hemorrhage and aid repair of damaged vessels. Disorder in coagulation lead to increased hemorrhage or thrombosis and embolism. Blood coagulation process requires coagulation factors, calcium, phospholipids. The coagulation factors, which are proteins, are manufactured by the liver. Ionized calcium is available in blood and form intracellular sources. Phospholipids are prominent component of cellular and platelet membrane. They provide a surface upon which a chemical reaction of coagulation can take place. Now, coagulation can be initiated by either two distinct ways. One can be the intrinsic pathway and another is the extrinsic pathway. These two pathways combine to form a coagulation. So here these two are very important pathways. So what is intrinsic pathway? Intrinsic pathway can be initiated by events that takes place within the lumen of blood vessels. The intrinsic pathway requires only elements such as clotting factors, calcium, platelet surface, etc. found within or intrinsic to the vascular system. The extrinsic pathway is the other route of coagulation. It requires tissue factor such as tissue thromboplastin, a substance that is extrinsic to or not normally circulating in the blood vessel. Tissue factor is released when the vessel wall is ruptured. Now we will see some definitions. What is coagulant? What is anticoagulant? What is thrombus? What is embolism? Drugs which promote blood coagulation and used in the treatment of hemorrhagic disorder are called as coagulants. The drugs which reduce coagulation of blood in intact blood vessels and used in prophylactic treatment of venous thrombosis are called as anticoagulants. What is thrombus? Thrombus or thrombosis is a pathological process in which a platelet aggregates and a fibrin clot occludes blood vessels. That is simply, it means formation of unwanted blood clots in the blood vessels. Now what is embolus or embolism? If this thrombus breaks off and float in the blood, it is called as embolus. If it reaches in brain, which can cause stopping of blood supply and which can cause stroke. If it reaches to the heart, it blocks the coronary arteries and can cause heart attack also. Now various coagulation factors are there, which is starting from factor 1 to factor 13. Each factor is named as, suppose factor 1 is there, so it is named as fibrinogen. Factor 2 is called as prothrombin. Factor 3 is tissue thromboplastin. Factor 4 is the ionized calcium. Factor 5 is the labile factor or proacceleratin. Factor 6 is unassigned. Factor 7 is stable factor or proconvertin. Factor 8 is anti-hemophilic factor. Factor 9 is it is called as Christmas factor or plasma thromboplastin component. Factor 10 is called as short power factor. Factor 11 is the plasma thromboplastin and factor 12 is Hegman factor or factor 13 is called as fibrin stabilizing factor. Now we are going to see very important cascade, or we can call it as coagulation cascade. So here it is represented in the simple manner over here. So coagulation cascade, we have seen what is intrinsic and extrinsic pathway. So both intrinsic and extrinsic pathway, they both eventually lead to formation of prothrombin activator. Prothrombin activator, which is actually the activator factor 10. Once prothrombin activator activated in the presence of calcium ion, it converts prothrombin into the thrombin. Conversion of prothrombin into thrombin happens, and the formation of sufficient quantity of thrombin into blood leads to conversion of fibrinogen into fibrin. But initially these fibrins are just monomers. And they cannot form a stable blood clot. So in presence of calcium ion and fibrin stabilizing factor, which is actually the factor number 13, it acts on them and convert fibrin monomer into fibrin polymer by formation of covalent bond in the fibrin monomer, and eventually that lead to the formation of clot by attracting lots of platelets, lots of phospholipids, lots of other material which adhere on them and form stable blood clot, which plugs the bleeding side and leads to hemostasis. Now this is the conversion, how we have seen that conversion of thrombin into blood clot happens, which is the overcome of extrinsic and intrinsic pathway. Now we will see what is extrinsic pathway in detail. It involves factor number 7, factor number 10 and factor number 5. Like this, through this extrinsic pathway, formation of thrombin happens, and through the intrinsic pathway also the formation of thrombin, and after that fibrin happens and blood clots happens. Okay, so first of all we are going to see what is extrinsic pathway. So let's first talk about the extrinsic pathway. A new extrinsic pathway begins with the new factor, that is tissue trauma. Now this trauma can be a vascular wall itself, or it can be a vascular tissue, and causes the release of tissue factor, also known as tissue thromboplastin. So this is the tissue factor or tissue thromboplastin, and this tissue factor causes conversion of factor number 7 to activated factor number 7A. Conversion of factor 7 to factor 7A in presence of calcium ion, and causes conversion of factor number 10 to activated factor number 10A. Factor number 7 causes conversion of factor 10 to activated factor number 10A, which combine with factor 5 in presence of calcium ion forms prothrombin activator, and results are same, that is prothrombin activated cause conversion of prothrombin into thrombin, then fibrinogen conversion into fibrin, and finally blood clot happens. So this is the extrinsic pathway. Now we will see what is intrinsic pathway. It involves factor number 12, factor number 11, factor number 9, factor number 8. Now let's talk about the intrinsic pathway. Intrinsic pathway will begin to any factor such as trauma to the cell or trauma to the blood cells, or cause exposure of the blood cells to the collagen. This causes activation of factor 12. So when the factor number 12A is converted, when the factor number 12 is activated, it acts upon the factor number 9 and causes activation of factor number 9A, and the factor number 11A, which causes activation of factor number 9 into 9A, and this requires high molecular weight kinogen and calcium ions. Factor number 9A, which is activated in presence of factor number 7, it combines with calcium ion and causes activation of factor number 10 into 10A. And when the events are same, so the following events are same as the extrinsic pathway, that is combination of factor 10 into the factor 5 in presence of the calcium ion leads to formation of prothrombin, and it subsequently act on prothrombin to form thrombin. Now what happens when we will combine the intrinsic and extrinsic pathway? So how we can summarize over here. So to summarize what happened in the coagulation cascade, we have the extrinsic pathway and intrinsic pathway. They both ultimately lead to formation of prothrombin activator, that is the activator factor number 10. This causes the formation of prothrombin. From prothrombin to thrombin acts as a fibrinogen to form fibrin monomer, but this monomer are not stable. They cannot form a clot, so that the fibrin stabilizing factor, which is the factor number 13, it forms lots of covalent bonds with the fibrin monomer, which lead to formation of fibrin mesh, and this mesh attracts platelets and phospholipids and forms stable clots, which are called as homeostasis or blood clotting. So here we have completed the blood cascade or clotting cascade pathway. These are some description of the same. Now in the next part we are going to see the anticoagulants. Thank you.